Everybody says DeepSeek V4 Flash is frontier-level reasoning at a fraction of the price, and I spent 5 charges trying to prove them wrong. DeepSeek V4 Flash claims cheap frontier reasoning, local runs on your own hardware, and near Opus quality. So, does it actually deliver, or is the hype outrunning the model? One of the biggest problems I run into when using AI agents is turning their output into YouTube content I can actually use to market my product. That's why this video is sponsored by Subscriber, a tool that helps business owners connect their AI agents to YouTube and market their products without spending 10 hours every week creating content. You can connect Claude or ChatGPT directly to Subscriber. It then analyzes your business, website, and YouTube channel to help you create SEO-optimized video ideas, scripts, thumbnails, and even complete videos that actually match your brand. What I like most is that every week, Subscriber gives me a list of high-potential video ideas I can immediately execute, and it can even help edit videos for me, with or without my face, including videos like the one you're watching right now. It's easy to get started, and you can try Subscriber for free using the link in the description below. Now back to the video. Claim 1. DeepSeek V4 Flash is comparable to V4 Pro when you give it a bigger thinking budget. The number that matters here is 12.4 times cheaper per output token. If that parity claim is real, you'd be paying pro-level bills for no reason, and if it's not, you're betting your pipeline on a smaller model that quietly falls apart on the tasks that count. I looked at what Deep Infra and coder Sarah actually published, and the reasoning-specific version of this claim looks credible. Flash at max thinking roughly matches Pro at high thinking, and that 12.4x cost edge is a community-reported figure with no same harness benchmark table behind it. But the vendor itself says Flash falls behind on pure knowledge tasks and complex agentic workflows, which keeps this from being a clean win on the scorecard. Claim 1 is partially true, the reasoning case holds up, but push into knowledge-heavy or complex agent work, and the parity story breaks down. So we're sitting at 0 claims fully verified, 1 partially true, and 4 still to go. I've spent enough time inside these models to know the difference between a benchmark that holds up and one that crumbles the second you take it off the leaderboard. Drop a comment if you've hit that exact gap yourself. Claim 2. DeepSeek V4. Flash scores 50 on the Artificial Analysis Intelligence Index at very low task cost. That number is the whole pitch. If you're running hundreds of tasks a day and the cost per task is genuinely 60% lower than a frontier competitor, that's real money, but a score of 50 only means something if it's measured by an independent source and not pulled from a press release. Artificial Analysis published the score directly. DeepSeek V4 Flash 0731 lands at 50 on their intelligence index with GPT 5.6, Luna Max, and GLM 5.2, Max both sitting at 51. 1 point back from the leaders, and the cost per task on DeepSeek's own API runs about 60% lower than GPT 5.6 Luna Max. No raw dollar figure in the cited article, but the index score itself is a real, independently measured number. Now, 1 point off the leaders sounds tight, and it kind of is. But the cost angle is what makes this score actually interesting. You're getting frontier-adjacent intelligence at 60% lower cost per task, and for high-volume work where you're paying per call, that spread is the whole decision. Claim 2 delivers the 50-point AA index score is independently measured, and the cost per task advantage is real, which makes this the strongest verified data point in the whole report. That puts us at 1 claim, fully verified, 1 partially true, 3 still to go. Claim 3, DeepSeek V4 Flash can handle Claude Opus level tasks at 105 times lower cost. You've probably seen this one floating around. The pitch is that you swap out Opus and your bill drops to almost nothing, and on a FlowGraph spec task, Kilo put both through the same job. The numbers on screen tell you whether that swap is safe. Watch what happens on the FlowGraph spec. DeepSeek V4 Flash scores 60 out of 100 for 0 or 2, while Claude Opus 4.7 scores 91 out of 100. Output tokens on Flash run roughly 1/89th the cost of Opus, so the price edge is real. But a 31-point quality gap on the same task is too big to call this a straight swap. even at a fraction of the price. Claim 3 falls short. Flash is massively cheaper, but a published 31-point quality gap on the same spec task means you're getting a cheaper alternative with real quality trade-offs, not Opus parity. That's 1 claim verified, 1 partially true, 1 falling short, 2 left. So far, the score is mixed, and the 2 claims still ahead are the ones that decide whether DeepSeek V4 Flash holds up when you actually put it to work. The practical consistency charge is up next, and that's where the gap between benchmark charts and day-to-day reliability either closes or blows wide open. Claim 4, DeepSeek V4 Flash is benchmark strong, but shaky in practical use. You run a test suite on a Friday, the model errors out before a single test executes, and you spend the afternoon debugging a setup script instead of shipping. That's the real cost of inconsistency, and it's exactly the scenario the sourced hands-on reports describe. I looked at 2 separate sourced reports. One community review says DeepSeek V4 Flash reads as partly benchmark maxed, strong on standard tests, less consistent in practical use. The Kalo hands-on test is even more direct. The suite never ran because the setup script tried to force reset the database and errored before the first test executed. 0 tests run. That's a production blocker, not a benchmark gap. Claim 4 holds up. The practical use criticism is backed by real hands-on evidence, and a test suite that errors before it even starts is about as clear a reliability signal as you can get. That's 2 claims verified, 1 partially true, 1 falling short, 1 left. Claim 5, DeepSeek V4 Flash runs locally on consumer hardware. The viral version of this says a 24GB VRAM PC or an M5 Max MacBook is enough. You buy into that, you spec your machine around it, and then you find out the actual floor is higher. That's a hardware purchase you can't easily undo. The local run story is real, which is pretty wild for a 284 billion parameter model. Dwarf star selective quantization shrinks DeepSeek V4 Flash from 568 GB down to 81 GB. But coder Sarah's setup guide says even heavily quantized local use needs about 33 GB of VRAM. FP8 needs around 80 GB, and full weights need roughly 170 GB. The 24 GB consumer claim on screen doesn't match those sourced hardware figures. Claim 5 falls short. Local runs are genuinely possible, but the sourced hardware floor sits at 33 GB VRAM minimum, which is above the 24 GB consumer threshold people keep repeating. Final tally: 2 claims verified, 1 partially true, 2 falling short. Alright, so here's where DeepSeek V4 Flash is genuinely strong. The 50-point Artificial Analysis Intelligence Index score is independently measured and real. Cost per task on DeepSeek's own API runs about 60% lower than GPT 5.6 Luna Max. Vellum lists it at 85.9% on BrowseComp. And selective quantization actually does compress a 568 GB model down to $81 GB for local use. And here's where it falls apart. The pro parity story breaks on knowledge tasks and complex agentic work. A published flow graph result put Flash at 60 out of 100 versus Claude Opus 4.7 at 91. One hands-on test suite failed before it ran a single test, and the local hardware floor is 33 GB VRAM minimum, not the 24 GB consumer figure going around. 2 of 5 charges verified, 1 partially true. Pick DeepSeek V4 Flash if you want cheap frontier-style reasoning at 60% lower costs per task, and you're okay, babysitting it through rough edges. Skip it if you need production reliability you can trust without rerunning prompts, because the benchmark heat does not survive contact with a real workflow. One thing the marketing doesn't mention: verbosity. Users report that DeepSeek V4 Flash's tendency to overgenerate output tokens can quietly wipe out the per-token cost advantage on longer tasks. I couldn't find a published token count comparison for this, but if you're running high-volume jobs, watch your actual output token counts before you trust the headline price. If you want to see how a frontier model holds up under the same kind of charge-by-charge check, The next video is DeepSeek V4 Should You Switch? And it goes through the full production case for the pro tier model that Flash is supposedly matching. Worth watching back to back with this one.